Okay, my normal focus is on Buddhism, but today this is something that came out of my Buddhist studies, but has nothing to do with Buddhism per se. In fact, it involves a couple of Hindu deities and a well-known ancient Greek deity, Dionysus. And I just want to start off by setting the mood by a passage from the Bacchae, or otherwise known as the Bacchantes, by Euripides, ancient Greek dramatist. And he writes about the disastrous effects that the cult of Dionysus had on the city of Thebes. Pentheus, the second king of Thebes, was dead against the cult of Dionysus. His grandfather, the founder of the city of Thebes, was a Dionysian. But this is what King Pentheus says: "I've come straight back from abroad, hurried home by rumors. Something very strange is happening in this town. They tell me our women folk have left their homes, in ecstasy if you please, and gone gadding to the mountains, the shady mountains, dancing in honor of this brash new god, this Dionysus they've got hold of." Well, dancing, women, occur in several places in myth, and they're usually dancing naked, and they're usually observed by men. One example of this, which I didn't dawn on me till I came here and walked past the Cutty Sark. Now, yes.
Sorry, we can't really hear you very well in the back.
Oh, can we turn up the volume on this? Does it need to be turned on? Oh, it's just for that? Oh, all right, I'll have to bellow then. Right, who knows the story? Who knows why it's called the Cutty Sark? Who knows what Cutty Sark means? Nobody. It's from a poem called Tam O'Shanter by Robert Burns. And a man is riding through the forest, and he comes upon a witch dancing in a glade, and she is wearing the Cutty Sark which she wore since she was 12. Cutty, short, sark, shirt. She was wearing a shirt that didn't cover much, and so he was transfixed, watched her, and eventually was discovered. And he galloped out of there with the witch on his heels, and just as his horse leapt over a burn, a stream or brook, the witch grabbed hold of the horse's tail. And of course, according to Scottish legend, witches cannot pass running water, and so she stayed on one side of it with the horse's tail in her hand. And if you want to see the tail, it's on the figurehead of the ship. But unfortunately, she's wearing a long dress, not the Cutty Sark, which the eponymous Cutty Sark of that vessel. But every time that ship made a successful journey from China, they replaced that horse's tail in her hand. Anyway, that's just a little reminder that the myth spread quite a bit. Now, I want to start with the story of Krishna, who, if you haven't read my book on the subject, you may not be aware that Krishna is an apotheosis of the Psilocybe cubensis mushroom. This is especially he protects the villagers of Vrindavan from a tempest which is hurled at them by Indra by lifting the hill Giri Govardhana, the hill which is abundant in cattle, above his head. He's blue, and he lifts it. The author of the Purana tells us that he lifts it as effortlessly as a child plucking a mushroom. And when he lifts it above his head, he becomes a chhatra for the people of Vrindavan. Now, chhatra means literally umbrella, but Sanskrit had no word for mushroom. What did you say when you wanted to refer to a mushroom? Well, you said chhatra, umbrella. And so, anyway, I won't dwell on the evidence for Krishna being a mushroom. That's all in my book. You'll have to go and read the book online. It's secretdrugs.net. Anyway, there is a story. Krishna is walking along the banks of the river Jamna, and he comes across the dairy maids of his village bathing naked in the river. Indians don't bathe naked. Even when they go and bathe in the river, they wear their underwear. And so he steals their clothes and hides their clothes and goes and hides in a kadamba tree and watches them. The kadamba tree is also involved in entheogenic potions. So they discover him and they demand their clothes back, and he makes them make their apologies for appearing naked to the god Varuna, who's a sky god, so they've got to like hold their hands above their head. You know, this is told as like a kind of bawdy tale about Krishna, about what a lad he was. But okay, Krishna represents Psilocybe cubensis. I'm also interested in buffalo deities, because water buffalo dung is the exclusive substrate of a very potent mushroom called Panaeolus camboginiensis. Grows only on water buffalo dung, which probably explains why the water buffalo recurs repeatedly in tantric literature and iconography. So when I found out that there was a deity like Krishna in Bihar state in India who was more to do with buffaloes than cows, I was immediately interested. I found that he has a myth which is similar to this myth of Krishna and the bathing dairy maids, except that this is more specific. It seems that the Krishna one has been tidied up, and for a start, he gets away with his life. They promise to worship him. The other stories are a bit more bloody. In the story of Birkua, this Bihari deity, he's riding his favorite buffalo through the forest, and he comes across a group of dancing naked witches. In the Bihari language, the word is dayin. Dayin, to me, it appears obvious that this is a corruption of the Sanskrit dakini, meaning a flying woman, or witch, or in later times enlightened Buddhist female, but in this case they're said to be witches. And he gets spotted. He again hides the clothes. He hides in a tree, pine tree this time. Pine tree is the host of Amanita muscaria. So he watches them for a while until he's discovered, and they tell their leader, go get him. And she sends snakes after him, which he kills. Well, the buffalo kills him. But then she turns herself into a tiger, and she goes and gets him. She tears him limb from limb, and he promises that he'll come back as a ghost and protect buffaloes. Well, the leader of these witches is his sister, who turns herself into a tiger and mauls him, kills him. Well, when I read this, it rang a very strong bell. I thought, I've read this before. It was a while before it dawned on me that it's the myth of King Pentheus, which is described in the Bacchantes by Euripides. So, in the story of King Pentheus, who I just read his words, he tries to capture Dionysus, and finds that he's actually shackled a bull, and he keeps trying to like throw him into jail and stuff, and it doesn't work. And eventually Dionysus tells him that if he's a good boy, he will take him into the mountains and show him the maenads, the crazy women. That's what maenad means. It's the same root as mania. He will show them dancing naked in their Dionysiac rites. Well, he does, and he gets discovered. Oh, by the way, he tells him that he has to put on women's clothes. He has to put on the clothes of the maenads first. So he has to become a woman in order to witness this. I'll get back to that later. Anyway, he is discovered by the maenads. And the leader of the maenads, who happens to be his mother, turns into a panther and tears him apart. So we have basically exactly the same story, except in one case he steals the clothes, in another case he appropriates them, he puts them on. I think this stealing of clothes or appropriating clothes may be significant in that it represents a patriarchal appropriation of ancient matriarchal rites. Now, in the case of the Gopini, the dairy maids, they were practicing the rites of Durga, the warrior goddess, in order to get good husbands. In the case of the Dakinis, it's not said, but they are obviously doing some woman's right. And in the case of the maenads, they are worshipping Dionysus. Now, Robert Graves, in his magnum opus, The Greek Myths, wrote about Dionysus as being a god of wine. In the second edition of the book, he says, I've changed my mind. There's a foreword specifically about this. He says, I no longer think he was about alcohol. The wine in question was merely a vehicle for other drugs. The other drugs in question being mushrooms. Now, he thought it was Amanita muscaria. I'm not so sure. I think it's more likely to be psilocybe, because we have references to blue wine in Greek literature. Homer, whenever he mentioned the sea, he called it the wine dark sea. Now, various commentators have said, this is silly. Wine isn't blue. Well, it is if you make it with mushrooms. I've seen it. And so, anyway, so we have Krishna as a mushroom god, and Dionysus as a mushroom god. Graves also pointed to Eleusis and to various other festivals and said, look, we have recipes for the sacrament. None of them make sense until you just look at the initials of the ingredients. And he points out that they spell out mushroom, or by mushroom, or mushrooms. You know, there are several of these, and they're all different ingredients, but they all have the same, or effectively, functionally, the same initials. Right. In the mythos of Krishna. It is said that Krishna would suddenly appear. Well, rather like mushrooms suddenly appearing. And when he did, the women of Vrindavan, this cattle raising place where he is supposed to have grown up, as soon as Krishna appeared, the women would disappear. They would drop everything that they were doing. They, halfway through cooking a meal, let it burn. Sweeping the house, like, who cares? I'm off to make love with Krishna. So it was expressed as having sex with Krishna. But in the morning, when they came round, they all thought that they had personally, exclusively had sex with Krishna. Well, I strongly believe that this sex is just a metaphor for the psychedelic experience. Krishna was the psychedelic experience and the mushroom which provided it. There are these things pointing to the use of mushrooms by women, but always, though these days we have this male figure that it's structured around. There is one other thing that I'd like to point out, and I assume that most people are aware of the Indian Hindu renunciates known as sadhus. A sadhu is usually somebody who's mature, has had a family, the family's grown up and moved away, and now they give up the life of a householder, renounce all that, and devote themselves to religious practice. Now, the Shiva sadhus, the Shaiva, are famous for going naked, covered only in a film of cemetery ash. They also sometimes carry a skull cup and a staff. The skull cup as an eating bowl and for begging. But there are some rituals, in Buddhism, for instance, in which it says internally, in order to create internal amrita, that is the elixir of immortality, in other words, the Buddhist psychedelic, you have to put the staff and the skull cup together. Why they do that, I had no idea, but it's some kind of symbol, I think, and so to get back to the sadhus, the Shivites, as I say, wear nothing but ashes, and the Vaishnava, the Vishnu sadhus, wear a loincloth and a mark on the forehead, a tilaka. So what do Krishna sadhus wear? They are transvestites. They wear women's clothes, wear women's jewelry, women's perfume, and they even seclude themselves for 3 days every month because they're unclean. Now, when they explain why they have to be transvestites, they explain, well, you have to become Radha to worship Krishna. Radha was his favorite dairymaid, his wife, if you like. There seems to be a lot of circumstantial evidence. There is nothing in writing saying, yes, we did this, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing to these mushroom deities having female followers and really no male followers. When the women went out into the fields to worship Krishna, to have sex with Krishna, their husbands did not leave with them. Most people who worship Krishna, both male and female, but to really do it properly, to do it up brown, as they might have said in the East End of London, you have to become a woman. It's also significant to me that the followers of Dionysus, the female devotees, were called Maenads by the rest of society. And it means crazies. It just means the crazy people or crazy women. Of course they're crazy. They laugh at your urban structures and your male-dominated society. They cannot be confined or bound by your rules. They must be crazy. Now, in the Bacchantes, there is a crucial point in the development of the story, and this is where King Pentheus goes indoors and puts on his women's clothes, because when he comes out, he is like a different person. And even the author of this translation, Paul Roche, he says this seems to be a pivotal point in the story, that he doesn't speak like he did before. He doesn't comport himself as he did before. Something happened that when he put on the clothes, like the clothes have obviously transformed him. Well, I've got news from Mr. Roach, Dr. Roach, sorry. It's quite obvious to any of us, if you read from that point on, you go, geez, he's tripping balls. I mean, this guy is obviously tripping. And that's why he is staring wildly and all the rest of the stuff that is described here. So it does seem that in the most ancient stratum of mythology, really, that we can get our hands on, we see this, we find these mushroom gods, occasionally mushroom goddesses, like I can make a case for Durga being a mushroom goddess. She's even involved with buffaloes too. She's also called Mahishasura Mardini, which means the crusher of the buffalo demon. Now, crushing was the way they prepared the drink from the mushroom. And the buffalo demon, I would say, is the thing that grows on buffalo dung, the Panaeolus cambogeniensis. We also find this crushing terminology used elsewhere in references to mushroom deities, typically mushroom deities. So I'd like to actually, I could go on talking about this stuff for hours, but it's not a really linear narrative. It's more like a web of suggestion and hint and vague allusions.